You are listening to Hit Play, Not Pause, a feisty menopause podcast for active, performance-minded women. I am your host, Selene Yeager. Each week, I bring you advice from athletes, scientists, researchers, and other experts to help you feel and perform your best, no matter what your hormones are doing. This show is a production of Live Feisty Media. Welcome back, strong, feisty women. I hope you all are well and enjoying your summer if it is summer where I find you, and your winter if you're on the other side of the globe from where I sit. And I have personally been enjoying my summer quite a bit. And it is really one of my favorite times of year. I just love being able to get on my bike in the warmth and the daylight at 6 or 6:30 a.m. and get in a nice ride or maybe a nice run and jump in the pool and still be at my desk writing and podcasting away by 9 a.m. I just really cherish that. So I hope you are doing well wherever you are too. But I digress. Let's get into this week's show because this week I am back in the studio talking to Dr. Jody Dushay, who we had on previously to speak specifically about GLP-1 weight loss drugs. And if you missed that one, I will put a link into the show notes so you can check out that conversation in full. Jody is the GOAT for talking all things weight loss because she's an endocrinologist, so she really understands hormones. That's important, especially for us women, as well as a weight loss researcher. And she has studied the effect of pharmacotherapies and dietary interventions on body weight for well over a decade. And she is also the founder and director of Well Powered, a comprehensive wellness and weight management program. She's a triathlete who has qualified for Kona 3 times. In short, she just gets it. And I wanted to bring Jody back on to have a show dedicated to calories in, calories out, which is what we see and hear anytime someone brings up the struggles that they're having with their weight. Well, it's just calories in, calories out, so eat less and move more. And that saying makes me insane. It always has, because it is so much more complicated than an elementary math problem, which you'll hear all about shortly. But just going into it, I want to give a couple of notes because when we stopped recording, Jody expressed concerns that she got too far into the weeds too quickly early in the conversation, which she kind of does and she kind of doesn't. Essentially, what you'll hear is she wants to establish out of the gate that yes, at its most fundamental base, calories in, calories out is foundational in weight loss, which is something she sees all the time when she's conducting experiments and they're preparing a cohort for a weight management study. They dramatically restrict people's calories for a short period, and people lose a bit of weight. Some more than others. We will get into that as well. So that's to say that no one in this conversation is denying that reality. What this conversation is really about is that there is way more to calories in than the food you eat. It's what your body does with the food you ate, and the same is true for calories out. It's how your body expends or doesn't expend calories. And there are many factors affecting all of that are honestly unknowable to the average person, not to mention that calories themselves are not an exact science. I'll also note that this conversation obviously fires me up because I have watched it play out over 30 years with everybody convinced, not everybody, but a lot of people convinced that it's just this simple mathematical equation when it's so very, very clearly not. And there's also part of this conversation, because I get fired up, where I share one of the more inflammatory assertions that I hear with a fair amount of frequency online. And when the words leave my mouth, I think, ugh, I kind of wish I had reframed that because it even feels kind of gross to say. But Jody's response actually left me really glad that I just laid it out there and asked that question because it was incredibly enlightening and added another really important layer to this whole conversation. So anyway, I hope you enjoy this one as much as I did. All right, very quickly before we get to it, give us a follow at Feisty Menopause on Instagram and Facebook. head into those show notes and sign up for my free weekly Feisty 40 Plus newsletter, and go to feistymenopause.com and check out all the courses and other great stuff that we have going on. As always, all my love right back to you guys for all the kind ratings and reviews at Apple Podcasts. I'm still gunning to hit 700 and we're getting there, so thank you very much. Finally, very quick thanks to MIDI for their continued support of the show. Midlife women deserve good care. MIDI is there to offer it. I've experienced it personally, so thank you for your continued support of this podcast. All right, enough of me. Let's have a few words about our awesome sponsors and get on with the show. All right, Jody, welcome back to the show. I am so glad you agreed to come back. I love talking to you. We actually got to meet in Boston when I was at the Female Athlete Conference, which is so great. I love meeting my guests in real life because it just adds an element to it. So thank you. Thanks for coming back on.
My pleasure. Thanks so much for having me again.
So this time we're going to talk. Last time we talked mostly GLP one drugs. We'll get there again, in this conversation. But I really wanted to go back to some foundational stuff in this one. And if you'll just humor me, for my little intro here, because this is always on my mind and I have a lot of thoughts. But one of the things that is most heartbreaking about the work I do and difficult about the work I do is the despair that I feel about weight, and I hear about weight in our community. We have 35,000 active women now in our community, and it is still the number one thing that comes up over and over and over and over again. And we all know that many women gain weight at menopause. And I have sat in myriad medical conferences, the Menopause Society conferences, where I hear, well, they just need to eat even less and move even more. And my audience includes women who have been doing, like you, Ironman triathlon, like running marathons, doing CrossFit games for decades. They have Training Peaks logs. They have been tracking their nutrition sometimes. It includes women who are nutritionists and medical professionals themselves and certified trainers or dietitians themselves. So I've always found that honestly kind of dismissive when I sit there and hear that, because I think if women who are trained and educated and doing all of these things recreationally or sometimes semi-professionally competing, and you're telling them, oh, you're just not moving as much as you think. I hear that all the time. So taking this one step further, let's say they do restrict their calories. That really often doesn't move the needle very much. Or maybe it does at first and then it stops. So what are they supposed to do? Not eat? Go to 500 calories a day? What are we talking about here? And we see people who they really, really, really are getting there, where they're not eating that much and they are still having weight issues that are making them unhappy. Do we assume they're lying or that they just don't know what they're eating? And despite all of this, we're just told over and over again, calories in, calories out, which is a phrase that after 30 years of writing in health and fitness and being a journalist in this space makes me just jump off the roof. I'm just I'm so glad that's it. That's my vent soliloquy for the day. But I want to break this down with you. So thank you for being here.
Sure. So it is, on the one hand, a simple law of thermodynamics, and on the other hand, extremely, extremely complicated for reasons that we will certainly get into. So, I mean, in the most fundamental way, that law of thermodynamics does apply. So, if in an ongoing way you expend more energy than you consume, it is true that you will lose weight. Now, that is a fact, but I'm going to explain, and hopefully we're going to get really in the details of why that is so complicated. But I mean, just as an example of how this can work, there are some clinical studies that look at pharmacotherapy for, say, maintenance of weight loss. So what they do is they enroll people and they have a run-in phase where they lose a certain amount of weight. So say you have to lose 5 or 10% of your body weight, and then after that point, you continue in the study. So admittedly, people who don't do that, they're out. So I mean, already speaking to the fact that that is, they come up with that with a calories in, calories out situation where they just calorically restrict. They put people on a very low calorie diet and then they run into this clinical study. So my point of this is that the majority of people then go on to see whether or not pharmacotherapy helps with maintain the weight loss, or lifestyle will help maintain the weight loss, and they compare those two. And the point of that is, yes, in the short term, it can work. In the short term, if you really, really restrict the calories, just like you said, you will lose weight. And then, that's how these studies are designed. And then you will see about weight maintenance. But the problem is really digging into what are calories in and what are calories out. Okay. So, first of all, what is a calorie? I think we have to start with that definition. So, it is really a unit of heat. And it was originally applied actually to vehicles, not to food. So it's essentially, right, what is the definition? So it is how much energy it takes to raise 1 kilogram of water 1 degree Celsius. And you determine that in food by taking food into a lab and burning it. Okay. So already we should say, wait a second, does that really happen? I mean, it doesn't really happen. It doesn't really happen for the vast majority of our food source right now. So when you go to the grocery store in the produce section, right, no one's burning up these apples, right? You have a whole display of apples, all your fruits, all your vegetables, whatever. And they contain a certain number of calories, but we know that there's a huge range. I mean, there is an apple and there's an apple. There's a small apple, big apple, medium size, all of these things. And they're all going to have different calories. And what's also going to affect that is, what type of apple it is, not just the size, what kind of soil did it grow in. So even determining the number of calories in a designated kind of food, a single food, is complicated. Now, let's go on to packaged foods. So packaged foods, again, they don't take these into the lab and burn them up. So we don't really know if, in fact, that caloric number that you see on a package is precise. We know that there are certain definitions. So for carbohydrates and proteins, it's 4 calories per gram. And then for fat, it is 9 calories per gram, right? So that is like, those are the major macronutrients, and that's how many calories per gram of that. But when you start to mix that all together, right, in a product that is made in a factory, they don't do that routinely. They don't burn it up. And so the number that you see on the label isn't necessarily the truth. So that is one major problem in terms of calories in. So, what is the actual caloric content of the food that you're eating? Hard to measure. Then, what about liquid versus solid calories, right? So, if you drink 100 calories, or if you eat 100 calories of gummy bears, or if you eat an apple that we're going to say is 100 calories, although we know that's complicated, what's going to happen in your body is very different, right? You rapidly absorb the liquid. Say it's some sort of a sugar, a beverage that has sugar in it, rapidly absorbed. Different things happen with insulin, different things happen with absorption, storage of those calories, etc. Now you're going to eat a piece of fruit that we're going to say is 100 calories. It's got some fiber in it, also some sugar, but the absorption is going to be slower because of the fiber. So your body's going to respond differently with insulin secretion, as well as other hormones. And then say you eat something that's packaged that has a lot of fiber, not a lot of fiber, 100 calories, your body is going to respond in a third way. So calories in is super complicated. Then tell me if you want me to stop, but I can keep digging
No,
down.
I mean that all makes sense, and I'll link it. There was a really great Scientific American paper. It might be almost 10 years old at this point, but it dug into all of that. It's like calories kind of the best we got, but it's almost a meaningless number sometimes. Like it's the best number we have, and it's what we
Mhm.
use. But to your point, it's by far not this exact science that people
Yeah.
say it is. When
So
especially when we're talking just that, we're going to talk about all this other stuff in a minute. Like because
right.
calories in is more than that number, and you started to get into that. It's
Yeah.
also what's happening internally, right?
So a good example of that is a study that was done in a small number, it was a very detailed study. So a small number of people with type 1 diabetes wearing a continuous glucose monitor. And what they did was they had a plate of food and it had on it carbohydrates, protein, and fat. And what they looked at was what happens to blood sugar excursions if you eat that plate in different orders. So if you eat the carbs first, or the fat first, or the protein first, what happens to your blood sugar excursion? Admittedly, these are people with diabetes. So it's, you want to take that into account if you generalize. But I think that in principle, it applies to everybody. So if you eat your carbohydrates first, they hit the stomach first, they're absorbed first. Say that's in this case it was a meal, but if it's a sugary beverage, okay, blood sugar is going to go up right away, insulin's going to get secreted, then you eat your protein, then you eat your fat. Versus what happens if you eat your protein first, absorb more slowly, or your fat first, absorb more slowly, and then the carbohydrates. So having a mixed meal and the order in which you eat the foods on that mixed plate makes a difference in terms of, again, how your body responds in a physiologic way to that food intake. So, yet another layer of complexity. And we can keep going. What else affects calories in? Age, sex, body composition, where you are in the menstrual cycle. Are you premenopausal, postmenopausal? What about genetics? What about your microbiome? All of these things affect calories in, right? The number of calories that your body is going to absorb from the food. Also, super interesting is that if you and I ate the same meal at the same time for 5 days in a row, there was a study that showed that you would see if we wore a glucose monitor, and I'm not, there are issues with that, but say you were using that as a one measure of what your body is doing when you're eating this food. 5 days in a row, we would have different glycemic patterns, glycemic excursions, even if we eat the same meal at the same time of day. This will be, this is true in women who are postmenopausal, certainly true in women who are premenopausal. If you were to compare like the luteal phase versus the follicular phase, that is going to make a really big difference as well. Thermic effective food, how much energy does it take your body to digest the food? That is a metabolic cost. So one of the components of energy expenditure, we can get to that when we talk about calories out, but that's also an important factor in determining what happens to how calories in are actually processed. So, it's not really so simple. And when your body's in a dynamic state of weight maintenance or weight loss or weight gain, different things happen as well to calories in, calories out. So in a study that's interesting, they both did, they overfed people and then underfed people. So they brought them a controlled environment, a clinical research center, and they actually deliberately, for one part of this, they overfed people, excess calories, several thousand excess calories a day. And what they found was that your body sort of tries to compensate by moving around more and trying to rid yourself of that to get back to that set point. And then also, if you drastically reduce the number of calories, your body will kind of adjust energy expenditure as a way of conserving because you're sort of sensing starvation.
And not everybody will have those same responses, though, correct? Like
Right.
some, and that there are myriad reasons, but we know from those studies, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I've been in this space a long time covering it, that you can do that and control these people, and everybody will have a different rate of weight gain or weight loss. And that,
Absolutely.
right. So, I mean, that alone tells me it is just more than this mathematical equation across the board for everybody.
That's right. And it is much more than the equation. And I think, though, even the equation, there's so many complexities to even calculating calories in because of, as we just said, the number of calories, like how precise is it? And also, sure, some people track calories and some people just kind of go on what they remember that they ate. And you said at the beginning, like, are people just lying? I never think people are just lying. I think people really, truly, when I see them in my office, they report to me what they ate over the past, say, 24 hours. But it's really difficult to remember. I mean, if you live in a chamber where this is all tracked, or if you're in a program where your food is provided to you and you don't eat one single other thing than what is provided, that is more precise. But I mean, if you asked me to remember what I ate yesterday, I would try my best and I would be wrong because you just don't, you really don't necessarily keep track of everything, nor do I think that you should. But that's another issue with calories in.
And there are, and I count myself among them. I don't ever count calories. And I know people who have tried to meticulously count and know. And why do some people not have to try to meticulously count and all of this it and still just maintain a sort of stable weight, even though I know I'm eating more or less or differently every single day because I'm not rigid about things. And people who are very rigid for a while on these diets, like still don't, they're still struggling.
Yeah, I think, I mean, the other thing I would say in terms of to that point of calories in, sure, if you put someone on a calorie restricted diet that is, and the calories are just low quality, right? There's that famous years ago, there was that Snickers diet, right? You can lose weight on a Snickers diet, right? Eat three Snickers a day and you'll lose weight. Sure, that's not a lot of calories if you eat three Snickers bars a day. And sure, you might lose weight in the short term, but there's no way you're going to convince anyone that you're healthier, right? The scale has moved, but the food that you're eating is, I mean, is low quality. So there is something really fundamental about the quality of the calories that you eat and your overall health, separate from what's going on in the scale.
Yeah, I have two follow-up thoughts on that. One is while we are talking about this calories in thing, and we have seen how many things have we seen? The Biggest Loser and all of these diets and Oprah and et cetera and so on, very high profile stories of big weight loss or not, but you always see a plateau effect. Like to my original question, at what point the body at some point does not keep losing weight at the same rate. And maybe that is how we segue into calories out at some point. But you can't just go down to zero. I had somebody in our group say, well, if you were in a concentration camp, you would not die fat. And I'm like, I'm not sure that's true. Like, I'm not sure that's, do you know what I'm saying? Like, you can I feel like, and correct me again if I'm wrong, you could starve yourself to death while not being emaciated.
Um, well, I mean, if the caloric intake is just so low, then I mean, you will end up reaching a very, very low body weight and maintaining that, and all kinds of other axes are going to shut down again for the calories out. So if you're truly starving, you're going to be starting to shut down a lot of important
Right.
hormonal axes, right? So reproductive axis going to be shut down. Thyroid going to have changes in that because you're really going to be conserving energy. But I think so to the point of it really is a moving target because as you reduce your calories, there is
Yep.
still sort of a signal to your body of relative starvation, even if you have excess body weight. And so you're going to make anywhere from subtle to severe changes. Your body will re-equilibrate in subtle to severe ways to try to account for that decrease in caloric
Right.
intake. But interesting with that is what goes into the equation as well is not really only the calories in, I mentioned this before with genetics and even epigenetics that you are taking in. So, say in your family, someone did survive a concentration camp or a famine, keto famine. So, what happened? Genes were changed. Let's say a famine that was, kind of longer term. So, genes are changed. That's epigenetics in response to this change in the environment. And so, what happens in subsequent generations who survived, right? So, that person survives a famine, passes down these new genes, and you are an efficient, subsequent generations are efficient storage machines
Wow.
because they had to be. So, your genes are literally, people say to me, if I eat any carbohydrates, have a really hard time losing weight. Or, why is it that I eat the same meals as my husband and I don't lose weight? My partner, loses weight.
Yeah.
Um, and that could be epigenetics. That could be the fact that your genes are
That's
literally
so
have been
interesting.
reprogrammed to hang on to these calories, which is how your ancestors
So,
survived this threat. So calories in is also, how much your body hangs on to those calories or not.
wow. Okay. That just thank you for that because that's really
Yeah.
interesting.
So people say to me, um, they say, and in my family, they'll say in my family, I have, a lot of people have trouble losing weight. And I think that there are not only these genetic, but again, these, epigenetic changes that happen. Single gene mutations are pretty rare, but I think that there are these genetic combinations that make it more difficult for people to lose weight. And I think that it can be, that does factor in hugely to the calories in, calories out. Because, again, 100 calories into 10 people is going to be dealt with very differently from
That's
a
fascinating.
physiologic metabolic standpoint.
Before we go into calories out, because this is a natural segue into it, you mentioned the glycemic excursions a few times. We were talking about that and how the order of the food and the different responses that people will have. What is the relationship with that with weight and how one, fat storage or weight gain?
So, I mean, it is extrapolating from studies in people with diabetes. So,
Mhm.
if someone has blood sugar that is always in the normal range, what is the effect on weight? I think we can't say for sure. It is
Mhm.
definitely the case that if you eat or if you drink a sugary beverage and your body, then your blood sugar goes up, you have insulin secretion to kind of keep your blood sugar in the normal range. So, that amount of insulin secretion is going to be different for everyone, depending upon how insulin sensitive or resistant you are. If you're more insulin resistant, then your body will secrete more insulin to keep your blood sugar in the normal range. If you're very sensitive to insulin, then you only have to secrete a little bit to keep your blood sugar in the normal range. So that is more of a factor in someone who is insulin resistant. So say blood sugar is still normal, but it's taking a lot of insulin to get the job done. So that can be more pro-inflammatory and that can make it more difficult, say, to lose weight. Um, than someone who is more insulin sensitive. So it can factor into how your body, really kind of processes these calories with does it take, a little bit or a lot of insulin to get the job done. Lots of circulating insulin at baseline and then in response to food intake is metabolically I don't want to say worse, but is metabolically favoring storage of calories as fat. I mean, that's what insulin
Gotcha.
does. It helps you store calories as fat.
Okay, thank you for clearing that up because I think sometimes we hear that a lot, but we don't necessarily make the connection to what that means practically.
Right. So there isn't a clear study that has
Yeah,
taken people and, kind of randomized them into that order and then looked at weight outcomes. So it is an
yeah.
extrapolation from what happens to blood sugar, which is, in turn what's going on with insulin. But I think it stands to reason that it does make a difference in terms of what's happening with fat storage.
Hmm. Yeah, even in metabolically otherwise healthy people. Right. That's what
Mhm.
you're saying. Yeah. Then let's go to calories out.
Right.
Because I don't, as I was saying that, I'm like, what about the gut microbiome? But then I was like, do I want to say, what about the gut microbiome? Because that influences our calories in too, right?
It does. It does. I mean, there was a lot of hope for fecal transplants, right? Transplanting stool, so that in it started in mice where they showed that a fecal transplant from a mouse that was obese into a mouse that was lean led that mouse to become obese. So there was a lot of hope that this might be the case in humans, and you could do fecal transplants in the form of it's actually stool. It's in a pill, although. I have heard that that when this was really getting a lot more attention, that people were doing enemas and people were kind of doing this DIY situation,
I
trying
heard that
to,
too.
yes. So, but what happened is it didn't really pan out in humans. So the fecal transplant has been effective for treating a certain kind of bacterial infection in the gut, but not really for weight loss. But the idea was one that is based on the fact that your body when you are your body will essentially take more calories um, out of food. Like you and I say, we might absorb different amounts of calories and we might also put more calories in stool. You and I, that would be different. So if you, for example, are, we might eat the same meal, we have different microbiomes. So if we were to look at the number of calories, you can look at kind of like stool content and see it would be different based on our microbiomes. So there's a study that's gotten a lot of attention recently looking at ultra processed food. Kevin Hall is
Yes.
doing it, right? In those
Mhm.
metabolic chambers where they measure absolutely everything. So your metabolic rate, you're in this chamber. So oxygen consumption, CO2 production, all your stool, all the food that you eat, all of that, how much you sweat, every single thing is measured that goes in your body and comes out of your body. And then you can see, when you compare different people eating the same food, you're going to see that there is like different amounts of calories that are going to be, put out in the stool, probably related to the microbiome, almost certainly related to the microbiome. So you and I, if we do eat a food that is known to be 200 calories, we won't absorb, you and I might absorb different amounts. 180 for
Yeah.
you, 220 for me. Some of that, a lot of that is due to the microbiome. If we're talking about like just kind of absorption of calories through the gut.
It's interesting because I've also seen studies recently on postmenopausal women that menopause changes the gut microbiome. And some people were
Yeah.
throwing out a hypothesis that perhaps this is also contributing to, certainly not the only driving factor to body composition or weight changes during this time. Just like another piece of the puzzle.
Yeah, yeah. So that's right. So the good bacteria in the gut actually help you to put more calories in your stool, right? So it's and sort of the less healthy bacteria in the gut will help you to kind of retain those calories. But it's still really early days in terms of thinking how do we change that, right? What probiotic do we take or what
Totally.
foods do we eat? Really, really early days with that.
Yeah. It's been about 25 years of early days with that. That's a really complicated field of study.
Yeah, it definitely, definitely is. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So now let's segue into calories out, which is also, I feel like it's such this is even more of a black box, like how do we know what the calories out? We have our rings and watches and straps and all of this stuff, but we don't, unless we're in a chamber like you're talking about,
Right.
we don't know what the calories out are.
Right. So again, widening the lens a bit. So what are the components of total energy expenditure? So if you think about like a pie chart, total energy expenditure is largely the majority of it is resting energy expenditure. So how many
Okay.
calories our bodies burn at rest for our heart to beat, our intestines to digest our food, our liver to work, pancreas, all of our internal organs, our breathing, all of that takes energy. So that's resting energy expenditure. That's about like 75% of our total energy expenditure. Then there is, as I mentioned before, something called the thermic effect of food. How much energy does it take for you to digest your food? This is meal dependent, of course, based on, simple carbohydrates don't take a lot of energy, and something that has a lot of complex carbohydrates and protein and fat that takes a lot more energy to digest. And there's, of course, individual variability with that. Of course, another important aspect is physical activity, energy expenditure. So deliberate physical activity, that's calories out. And then there's this other component that's it's MEAT, non-exercise activity thermogenesis. It's essentially what we it's fidgeting. It's what we're, doing when we gesticulate with our hands, with you nodding your head, people who they sit in a meeting and the leg is like shaking, 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 right? It's just that fidgeting behavior, which really interestingly, when you do, I talked about that overfeeding study. One of the things that goes up a lot when when people are deliberately overfed is that fidgeting thing. Like they just noticed that people really were not sitting still as much. So it wasn't like they were doing more deliberate physical activity. But what changed the most was this NEAT. And NEAT can be actually like a pretty important part of your energy expenditure, but it is largely hardwired. You can't necessarily turn yourself into a fidgeter.
Yep.
Um, but it is anyway, it's an interesting and important component of your total energy expenditure. So those are the four major things: resting, thermic effective food, deliberate physical activity, and then NEAT. And just like we said with calories in, what do you think affects all of these? The same things: age, sex, body composition, muscle versus fat, what proportion of muscle versus fat is in your body. Muscle is more consumes more energy, right? Takes more energy at rest. How fit are you? Where are you in the menstrual cycle? What about medications? They can affect this. Genetics, temperature, where you live, latitudes can make a difference. Hormones, thyroid, testosterone, and then of course the microbiome. So all of these things contribute to energy out. So it's really hard. You can wear any device that you want. And what I would say is that the value of these devices, I tend to be a bit of a Luddite. I'm super not into data, but if you are into the data, that's fine. I just wouldn't use it as the absolute truth. So when people say to me, look, I'm logging all my calories. I am consuming 1,500 calories a day. I have a Fitbit and it's telling me that I am, burning this many calories. Or, I go to the gym and the machine says that this is how many calories I expended. So, I go home and I eat, it says 400. So I go home and eat 400 calories. I think that you just need to actually view those as ballparks. I don't think you should view them as like the actual precise number. And if you do wear a device, that's helpful because you can just kind of look at day to day. So say it says, you want to get a sense of, was this a heavy physical activity day or a lighter physical activity day, as opposed to this is literally the number of calories that I expended. It's true that you program these devices with the important variables. So what is your age? What is your sex? What is your weight? Not BMI, so just what is your weight? Certainly not body composition, and measuring body composition is also full of problems, which we can get into. But I think that it's just good to look at it in terms of day to day. So if your Fitbit tells you that you are expending about 2,000 calories a day, that may or may not be true, but but it's just kind of a bar that you're going to say, okay, this is what I typically do, and today was more or less active. I think people really run into a lot of frustration when they are, kind of again looking at these numbers and nothing's changing. Remember, when you're less physically fit, you burn more energy when you do, if you walk 1 mile.
Yeah, you become
You're
more
not going to,
efficient when you get
yeah,
fitter.
exactly. So, I mean, it's amazing for your cardiopulmonary health, but very frustrating because you ultimately end up expending fewer calories. But if you're going to go, so you don't wear any kind of device and you're just looking at what the machine tells you in the gym, as you are in a dynamic state of weight loss, that number, you really can't trust that number. The elliptical tells you that, it'll say the same thing every day, right? I mean, you can kind of change the weight that you're putting in if you want, but most people don't do that in the gym. So you can't really trust those numbers if it's not your own personal device. And if it is a personal device, I would say you really need to also take into account all of these other variables. And, again, if you did the same workout Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, you would not expend the same number of calories. Your body isn't exactly this precise metabolic machine. It's going to be different day to day based on a lot of things, right? How much sleep did you get? What did you eat the day before? What did you eat that morning? How stressed are you? All these things are going to really play into how many calories you expend with the exact same workout.
And why is that? Like, what is causing that variability when you're talking about sleep or stress or all of that?
So I don't think that we can say it's one thing in particular, right? I mean, if you're sleep deprived, then you are kind of in a more pro-inflammatory state. How does
Mhm.
that affect, your metabolic efficiency?
Right.
I think that I don't think you can put your finger on what it is exactly,
Hmm.
um, other than the fact that, the body isn't a machine, right? So,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
Well, and what is happening to the resting metabolic rate as you're losing weight? That is going down, correct? So that part of or
Yeah.
is
So
okay.
depending upon how drastic and how fast it is, right? So your body does sense relative starvation. So there are adaptations. Typically, the numbers people quote are about 300 to 400 calories per day that your body will sort of hang on to if you're in this dynamic state of weight loss because your body is sensing that you are starving. And so,
Right.
remember, we're designed to survive famine, not just survive excess. So once the body senses that there are fewer calories coming in an ongoing way, you are going to your body will start to conserve some calories.
Right.
And as I said before, right, remember, think about generations past and like how scared or how drastic your body adjusts to that, there's a lot of factors that are out of your control in terms of what your body does. Also, how many times you've had weight cycling can make a
Hmm.
difference, right? So, your body,
Yo-yo dieting, as it used to be called, right?
yes, or if you have had a history, if someone's had a history of anorexia, right, with
Mm.
severe caloric restriction, often later in life, it is the case that the total number of calories that you will eat in order to prevent weight gain is very small. And or said differently, you gain weight on like a pretty low number of calories because your body is like, really storing things very, very efficiently because you've survived anorexia. So that can make a big difference.
And athletes, I mean, we see people in our audience who have struggled with low energy availability and REDS, relative energy deficiency in sport, and that has a pretty profound
Mm.
effect
Yes,
on.
definitely. I mean, it's really not that different, right? I mean, it is, um, it's putting you in a situation where your body, yeah, absolutely is having to hang on to really every single calorie that you put in,
Yeah.
because, yeah, in order to survive.
And as you're talking and you were mentioning all of these things that affect all of this, I was just like, okay, so what does that mean when women enter the menopause transition? And so many of these variables come up to the surface, right? We have maybe a little bit more insulin resistance and maybe a little bit more inflammation because estrogen is anti-inflammatory, maybe a little bit of a change in our gut microbiome, and definitely some changes in our body composition. And when you take all of that together, it kind of makes sense that we're seeing body composition changes, right? Even though we're doing the exact same thing, because that's what everybody says. I am doing the exact same thing and my body is changing what's happening. And the body is changing. That's what's happening, right?
Right. And it's literally the body is changing both calories in and calories out. And so there is this you're in a state, it's a new equilibrium. I wouldn't call it a disequilibrium, but it's a new equilibrium where um as we age anyway, you're going to have a situation where your metabolism slows down. That's a normal part of aging. It's actually adaptive, right? As you get older, say into your 80s and 90s, you don't want your cells turning over really fast. You don't want to have like a super fast metabolic rate. That's not adaptive, right? You want slower turnover. You want to, that's going to be, beneficial, say, for preventing malignancies. And you don't want the engine to be like super, super revved up, slower, slower. And then, that is what you see as people enter their, as I said, 80s, 90s, or even older than that. And in fact, like hormonal axes do adapt to that. So it's normal for the thyroid axis, for example, to slow down as people get old and, very old. And what you don't want to do is sort of return that axis to what it was when you were 20. Same with testosterone. You don't want to do that. Um, a lot dicier when you talk about hormone replacement. I won't go there, but if you're just talking about, say, a different hormone replacement, so testosterone, repleting testosterone in men, you don't do that to a level of a 20-year-old male when someone is 75. This is a totally different conversation when we're talking about
Yeah,
estrogen
because
replacement.
boy, oh
So,
boy, we are having like that is, but we won't go down that road, but it's an interesting conversation because we're in the discovery process. That's nascent too. We have researchers who are saying maybe we should put estrogen levels back up at premenopausal rates. And I'm like, should we? Do we know that? I mean, we'll find out. I don't know. Like it's,
right.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. No, I know. And in sort of a fundamental teleologic way, you wonder, like, really,
Should
should that
we?
be happening?
I don't
But
know.
I mean, we don't know, right? We don't know what that will hold in store. So what happens is, right, the as I said, so both sides of the equation change as we go through menopause. And so it's it's a lot of trial and error and just figuring out, what is some of it is getting used to a new equilibrium, which is I don't want to be, you don't want to sort of be, I don't know what the word for it is, where you just tell someone, oh, don't worry about it. It's fine. This is a normal adaptation. I guess patronizing is sort of a word, but it's not exactly what I mean. To tell women that this is fine. This is normal. Don't worry about it. Because for a lot of people, there is a more significant amount of weight gain. So we're not talking
Yeah.
about 5 pounds, but maybe we're talking about 15, 20, 25 pounds that happens during menopause. And I think that we don't know exactly where to point the finger in the equation, but I'm sure it's at both sides of the equation, both calories in terms of how your body is processing those, and then calories out in terms of how your body, how efficient or not efficient you are at expending
Yeah.
the energy. Yeah.
And let me ask you this, because if you look around the whole wide world over time, people, men and women, as they get older, tend to put on a little more fat. Like they tend to and I have heard that there is a protective element of that. And I think that we're so driven, and maybe it becomes with our youth worship in our culture specifically, but there is something to be said, especially when you're in those older years, right? To having some storage.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, just from a fundamental fertility standpoint, right? Like you want to have a little bit of meat on your bones, right? You want to have some muscle mass. That's going to protect you in terms of balance and strength. Um, it's going to be what allows you to be able to be ambulating, maybe with some assistance or without assistance, going upstairs, carrying your laundry, doing your grocery shopping. All those things require you to have enough strength, which is enough muscle mass, but also some, sort of stored fat. Um, if you if you don't, and you have, say, an illness,
Yeah.
where already as you age, appetite is reduced, energy expenditure, you don't expend as much energy, you're not going to really have any buffer, really. And so I think that that is definitely true, that there is some adaptation to storing a little bit more um, fat as you get older. And so maybe the body is getting ready for that, right? During menopause, that's sort of that switch. It's just that in some people, when the switch happens, kind of I guess, how what is the wattage of that light bulb that goes off,
Yeah.
right? Like, okay, aging, and then how much do we have to really start to store to protect ourselves? And that
Yeah.
is highly individualized, but that is true that there is a protective component of it.
Yeah.
And
Okay. Go ahead.
also, one more thing, like a healthy appetite is really a great prognostic sign as people age, right? So, wanting to eat, already your taste changes until appetite goes down as we age. So having a hearty appetite when you're 80 years old, it's great. It's really, really great. It's not the time to worry about, not eating dessert, not eating things that you enjoy, for sure.
Yeah. We did a whole show on GLP-1, so I don't want to spend a ton of time on that, but I do want to circle back to it because what I have heard in conversation is GLP-1s are proof that it's calories in, calories out. And that is a very simplistic in my mind way of looking at it because as we've mentioned, it's not just like how much food I'm putting in my mouth or how much I'm exercising, though those drugs do seem to have a pretty profound effect on the former, the appetite. Um,
Right.
but but there's more at play, right? As far as how these drive weight loss. And I'd like to discuss that a bit, like the mechanisms behind them.
Right. I guess I just want to clarify, when you say people say GLP-1s are proof of that because they're saying that GLP-1s reduce your appetite, therefore, it's
That's
just
ex-
okay.
that's exactly right. That's
Yeah.
exactly right. That's what people are saying.
Right. So, okay. I think that we don't know for sure because this is not measured in a lot of the large studies. What happens to energy expenditure if you're losing weight with, say, a hypocaloric diet or a GLP-1?
Oh,
So,
interesting.
is there we don't
Right.
know if you have a smaller reduction in the decrease in energy expenditure,
Right.
right?
Right.
That happens. So in other words, is there or do you maintain, say, the same
Yeah.
total energy expenditure, resting energy expenditure with a GLP-1 while you're losing weight compared to what happens when you're having a low calorie diet? We don't know that for sure because they don't measure that
Yeah.
in maybe in a subset of people. Similarly, they don't measure except in a subset of people, body composition. So some of the larger studies do measure body composition in a subset to try to look at muscle loss, um, and see if there's any significant change in that. So, and we could talk about that like now or in a second about like what happens to body composition with these medications. But what I would say is that certainly my experience is that people who have change in what they eat and how much they exercise while taking a GLP-1 do better, right? They have better, certainly better maintenance of weight loss and also possibly more weight loss. So I think that it doesn't, I don't know that I would say that GLP-1s really do say, aha, we see it really is that, because you can't control for what people are doing with their, how much they're moving and what exactly that they're eating. And also GLP-1s, they do affect calories in to the extent that how your body is dealing with that. Do they change the microbiome? We don't know. Do
Right.
they, certainly by delaying gastric emptying, that affects the thermic effect of food. So they do have an
Mm,
effect on that. So it really isn't just the
right.
appetite, right? Just
Right.
appetite reduction, fewer calories in. It may also be that they affect literally how your body is processing those calories.
Right.
Um,
That makes sense.
Yeah. So, and in terms of body composition, I think there's been a lot in the media about, do GLP-1s eat away your muscles, right? Do you have
Yep.
more muscle loss?
Yeah.
And the data don't support that. So far, the data don't support that. There is no clear evidence that if you lose 10% of your body weight, or we'll make it higher, 20% of your body weight through bariatric surgery or through hypocaloric diet or through GLP-1s, that you're going to lose disproportionately more muscle with a GLP-1. That is not firmly established. In fact, it's really hard to measure body composition accurately. Even DEXA, when you're looking at muscle mass, it's like a subtraction. So fat-free mass, like skeletal muscle, is just a component of fat-free mass. So it's like
Right.
a few degrees of separation from that. So it's very messy. Other non-invasive ways of measuring body composition, like through bioelectrical impedance, are notoriously inaccurate but cheap. So, you can do that, but there's huge variability based on how much water is in your body. So time of day makes a difference. But GLP-1s may also affect the amount of fat that is in muscle. And so what
Mm,
you may have is improved muscle function. So body composition may change in ways that are not detectable. So it may seem as though you are losing more fat-free mass, but what may be happening is you have less fatty infiltration into the muscle. And so your muscles are actually working better and more efficiently. And this is really more important in people who are elderly and you have issues of frailty, right? So, you worry, okay, if somebody is 80 years old and they lose a lot of weight on a GLP-1, are they really losing way too much muscle mass? So you definitely do worry about that, but there is some indication that, well, actually, the muscle function may not be so adversely affected. So important to get the nuance of that. And that those are still in animal studies. We don't know. We don't do muscle biopsies of people. That'd be great. I mean, that's how you'll know, is by doing
yeah.
muscle biopsies in people who are across the range of response to GLP-1s.
When you talked about there's no difference between all those different kinds of weight loss, isn't the issue with muscle loss anytime that you have some sort of rapid weight loss? You're going to be trying to counter muscle loss, right? Like that's
Any weight loss at all, rapid,
yeah,
slow,
that's what I mean. Oh, okay.
you definitely lose. I mean, you lose muscle and you lose fat. Again, highly individualized. 10
Right.
people, they'll all lose different proportions of fat and muscle. But for sure, to date, there's no way that you can have any intervention for weight loss that 100% preserves muscle mass.
Yeah.
You lose both. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's why, I mean, we say it all the time. Resistance train, please lift weights. If you don't, like,
Yeah.
yeah.
Lift weights for sure. As we age, lift weights, for sure. Make sure you have protein in your diet. All of those things are really important.
What do you think of the whole trend of microdosing? I hear that all over now. I know I just cringe because most of it
Well,
is like the stuff that is compounded, right? Like what is happening? Talk to me. Like,
well, it depends what you're saying about microdosing. So I guess I would say, would you say I'm microdosing if I have patients who have a really strong response to the lowest dose? And so I keep them on the lowest dose of a GLP-1 because they are losing a lot of weight. So I'm using a low dose deliberately because, weight loss is so robust. So is that microdosing, right? Or is this, I mean, to microdose, I guess, if you're defining it as using less than the dose that you can actually prescribe, then it has to be compounded. Although now all of those are illegal as of February, May. Yes,
oh,
May 24th. Yeah, that's when the FDA, so from February 24th, they said, okay, we're going to give some compounders 60 days, others 90 days. And then after that, everything has to be shut down because there's no longer shortages of this medication. So this whole shortage rationale for compounding is gone. So they're really all illegal at this
Wow.
point. So the only thing you can really microdose by tweaking the dose is semaglutide as Ozempic, because that is one where the pen actually has like little clicks, and so people are, you're able to listen for the clicks and take less than the dose. So I mean, I don't know. There are reasons why you might do that when you're using it like for a medically indicated reason to manage side effects and things like that. But I mean, there's just no data on what is the effect of microdosing using this like little dose in someone who has a normal body weight and wants to lose a few pounds. No data on safety, no data on durability of effect, no data on how long you're going to have to do this. I mean, these medications are not meant to be used in that way. They were approved for by the FDA for long-term use to treat diabetes or to treat obesity, high body weight, high BMI. So, it's a completely data-free zone. Um, and there's really only Right. There's only one device that will allow you to do that. And I think I did say before pretty clearly, like compounding, I'm really not in favor of that. But I do know that there's some chatter with athletes about this. And I
Yes,
would
that's
just say,
why.
yeah, it's it's really data free. These medications do have side effects.
Are
How
they
will it
doing it because they're trying to be athletes while they're on? I mean, do you think like in the best intentions? Because it must be difficult to try to be to pursue your athletics while you're on these drugs, correct? Am I
Well, you have to be careful. For sure, you have to be careful, right? Like if you get dehydrated, there's a risk of kidney injury that can be very severe. They can cause constipation or diarrhea, both of which nightmare if in sports. I mean, both of those, yeah, no bueno. So, um, and then you can get nausea, you can get reflux, and really not known the effects of using these medications when you're doing the, super, super vigorous, high level, elite level competitions. We really don't know. But the risk of dehydration, I mean, that for sure is a problem. That can be very damaging to your kidneys. And, I just I don't know. I don't know how you would feel if you were taking this for the desired outcome of like losing 5 pounds for,
right?
5 or 10
That's
pounds.
why I'm wondering where the intersection is happening. I'm wondering if there are people who are like, well, maybe if I just take a little. Do you know what I'm saying? Like that's what I think I'm
Right.
hearing, that I can have both of these things. I can have my a- athletic self and I can have this medication to help perhaps. And I don't know. It feels like I don't know.
I mean, also, if you, depending upon the level at which you're competing, you really want to know how your body is going to handle your caloric intake. So if you're doing that, and remember, they last a week, right? But they last longer, actually, but they're once weekly injections, but they're really not out of your system for definitely longer than a week. It can be 2 weeks, maybe even longer. So how your body is absorbing and processing the calories that you're taking in, if you're taking a GLP-1, I mean, I don't know if you want to play with that if you're competing at a very, very high level. And, how are you going to tolerate simple carbohydrates that you need during an endurance endeavor? Or, how are you going to tolerate what's going to happen to your nutrition a week before some, really long, I don't know, 100-mile Western states, right? Like, you really, I don't know that you want to mess around with that.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a whole other avenue that we don't need to go down here. Is there anything that we haven't talked about that you think that we should address or any final words you have on all of this for people as we come up to the top of this hour? Because we could obviously talk for days on the subject, but I think we've covered what I wanted to cover pretty clearly.
Yeah, I mean, I think what I would say is that, the take-home points are that thermodynamics are real. However, both sides of the equation are very complicated. And, it's a lot of it does come down, I think, to common sense for best health. this audience, I think, is going to be super easy to convince about that. But essentially, look at what you're eating. If it looks healthy, if it looks like food, then that's great. When you're reading a calorie label, don't take it as like the truth, the absolute truth. And similarly, if you're working out and you are improving your fitness, maintaining a high level of fitness, that's great. Don't necessarily be obsessed with what a machine is telling you in a gym for the number of calories that you're expending. Just look for other progress that you're making that is like very, very concrete. If you can't do any push ups and in a month you can do 10, that is progress, right? I mean, that is important in terms of, it's not really, I mean, it's related to calories out, but look at your fitness gains and your energy expenditure. Just find other really objective ways as opposed to calories out, right? I mean, hopefully the vast majority of people who are listening are exercising not because they are super focused on calories out. It's for the other enjoyment, it's for the improvement, it's for the whole body, mental, physical benefits of that and staying fit and healthy over the lifespan.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much. Thank you for the work you do, and good luck in your own triathlons and endeavors you have coming up.
Thanks. And again, it was great to meet you in person recently.
Well, that's our show. For the next few weeks of summer here, I thought it would be fun to share a little series of stories I have on midlife women doing rad things. So first up, we are bringing back Jeanette McGill for the third time because, drumroll please, she freaking did it. She made it to the summit of Everest. And what a story. So come on back for that one. And until then, as always, stay feisty. You've been listening to Hit Play, Not Pause, a feisty menopause podcast for active, performance-minded women. I'm your host, Celine Yeager. The show is edited and produced by the strong, talented, and amazing women at Live Feisty Media. Follow us on social media at Feisty Menopause, and please help us spread the word. Screenshot and share this episode on your social media channels with the tag @FeistyMenopause. Share the show with your friends, and please subscribe, like, review, and rate this show wherever you get your podcasts. Word of mouth and good reviews make it easier for other listeners to find. Thanks for listening, and as always, stay feisty.